"If you're so good, fix my ship." Empress says, 28 engineers failed. Human dad did it. The massive ship drifted in orbit above the Emerald Planet, its hull gleaming under the twin suns. The ship was a marvel of alien technology, built to dominate space travel and warfare. Yet despite its size and power, it shuddered as if in pain. Alarms blinked faintly in the corridors, and the low hum of failing engines filled the air. No matter what was done, the ship refused to operate normally. Inside the engine chamber, 28 engineers were already exhausted. Each one had tried for days, some for weeks, and each one had failed. The hum of the core grew louder as if mocking their efforts. The engineers were proud, brilliant beings from various worlds in the Empire. They had studied the finest schools, memorized endless equations, and handled the most advanced machinery in the galaxy. Still, they could not fix the problem. "The core is unstable," said one engineer, a tall figure with green skin and long, flexible fingers. He tapped his console nervously. "We can't isolate the cause. Every solution only makes it worse." "This is unacceptable," said another, her voice sharp. She had violet eyes that seemed to pierce the metal walls. "The Empress will not tolerate failure. We must find it, or we will be punished." Punishment in the Empire was severe. Failure was not only a personal shame, but could bring disgrace to one's family, homeworld, and entire career. Some engineers whispered fears of exile or worse, and the tension in the chamber was thick. The humming core seemed almost alive, groaning as if sensing the fear. Above them, the Empress sat in her observation deck. She was elegant, regal, and terrifying in her calm authority. Her robes shimmered like liquid metal, and her eyes glowed faintly, reflecting the lights of the failing ship. She had ruled the Empire for decades, and her word was law. To see her flagship falter made her blood boil. 28 engineers," she said, her voice low but sharp. "And still the ship cannot function. Is nothing in this empire reliable?" Her advisors bowed and murmured excuses, but the Empress ignored them. She was not satisfied with words. She wanted results. She had invested enormous resources into this ship, which carried her across the galaxy, enforced her rule, and displayed her power. To see it falter was unbearable. She considered calling the next group of elite engineers, but the thought of repeating the same failure made her scowl. Then, a commotion near the airlock caught her attention. A human girl stepped in, clutching a small bag. She was quiet but alert, her brown hair tied into a simple braid. Behind her was a man, tall and sturdy, with hands that looked worn from work. His eyes were calm but wary, and his face showed the lines of a man who had faced hard life on a distant world. "Father," the girl said, relief in her voice. She ran toward him, and he embraced her briefly, careful not to brush against the strange atmosphere controls. He looked around the chamber, noting the blinking lights, the smell of hot metal, and the tense alien engineers. The Empress's eyes narrowed. Humans were rare in her empire, and seeing one casually walking into her ship was unusual. She had heard tales of their stubbornness, their strange ideas, but she had never seen one in person. Curiosity sparked in her mind, mixed with irritation. "Who are these humans?" she demanded, her voice cold. "Why are they here?" One of her advisors bowed quickly. "They are civilians, Your Majesty. The girl is part of an exchange program. Her father came to accompany her back to her homeworld." The Empress tilted her head. She studied the man, noting the plain clothes and the simple tools he carried. He did not look like a soldier or an engineer of note. Yet she felt an unusual ripple of interest. "Let him try," she said suddenly, her tone sharp with challenge. "If he is so clever, he will fix the ship. If he cannot, then he is worthless. And do not waste my time with excuses." The engineers gasped. Some whispered in shock. No human had ever been trusted with such a task. 28 of their best had failed, and now an outsider, a simple human, was expected to succeed. The idea was absurd. They watched him skeptically as he stepped toward the humming core, his boots clanking softly on the metal floor. John Carter, the human, looked at the machines with steady eyes. He was not proud or arrogant. He had no illusions about his abilities. He was, after all, a freight mechanic from a distant colony, used to repairing cargo ships, trucks, and other heavy equipment. Nothing as sophisticated as this, nothing alien or massive. Yet he had learned one thing from life: persistence often mattered more than skill. He walked slowly among the consoles, observing the blinking lights, the vibrating floors, and the subtle warmth that radiated from the failing systems. He did not touch anything at first. He listened, inhaled the air carefully, and asked simple questions that made the engineers frown. "When did it start?" he asked in plain tones. "Weeks ago," said one alien engineer. "We do not know the cause. The core fluctuates. All attempts to stabilize it fail." "What about small systems?" John asked. "Any minor failures that could affect the flow?" The engineers exchanged glances. They had not considered that. Their minds were trained to think in grand theories, complex solutions, and elegant calculations. John was asking about minor things, things almost invisible: small pipes, small loops, and simple circuits. The question itself made the room quiet. "You cannot fix it," one engineer said bluntly. "You are human. You have no experience with this scale of technology." John smiled faintly, not offended. He had been told similar things many times. He simply said, "I just want to look first. Let me see what's going on." The Empress watched him closely. Her face showed amusement mixed with disbelief. She had expected him to fail instantly, to make a mistake that would ruin his chances. Yet he moved carefully, methodically, as if he could feel the rhythm of the machine. She leaned forward slightly, curiosity overcoming her irritation. Perhaps this human had something different. Lily watched her father nervously. She had always admired him, but never in the way she would soon. She had seen him fix broken engines back home, but this was different. This was a living, humming monster of metal and energy. If he failed, it could explode or worse. Yet John's calm steadiness reassured her. He was quiet, focused, and attentive in a way that made her trust him even more than before. The engineers muttered among themselves, doubting every move he made. Some tried to intervene, offering advice or pointing out mistakes. John listened politely but did not change his approach. He crouched near a pipe, tapped a small panel, and watched the reactions carefully. The readings were subtle, small shifts in pressure and heat that the others had missed. Hours passed, yet John did not rush. He moved slowly, observing, noting, and sometimes writing small sketches of the energy flows. The humming of the core seemed to respond. It stabilized slightly, then faltered again. John frowned and adjusted a minor valve, one that the engineers had ignored. The change was subtle, almost invisible, yet the core responded with a small, steadier pulse. The Empress leaned back, intrigued. She had never seen the human mind at work like this. While alien engineers relied on calculations, theory, and complex devices, the human relied on observation, patience, and small adjustments. It was simple, almost crude, yet effective. By the end of the day, John had mapped the failing areas, marked the pressure points, and suggested a small reroute of energy flows. The engineers were forced to admit, grudgingly, that he had seen things they did not. Some were angry, others humbled. The Empress, however, saw opportunity. This human might just save her flagship, and if he did, she would owe him nothing, yet gain everything. John stood in the engine chamber, tired but focused. He did not yet understand the full scale of what was wrong, but he had begun to understand the rhythm of the ship. It was not just a machine. It was a living system with quirks and flaws. And to fix it, he would need to work carefully, step by step, the way he had always fixed broken engines on Earth. The Empress's voice came over the chamber speakers, calm but commanding. "If you are so good, human, fix my ship." The Empire is watching, and I will know if you fail. John looked up, his brown eyes steady. He nodded once and began to plan his first real adjustments. He was just a human, a simple mechanic, and yet he felt something strange, confidence. Maybe humans were not meant to build empires or massive warships. Maybe humans were meant to endure, observe, and solve what others gave up on. Lily watched her father, her admiration growing. This was no longer just a trip home. This was a chance to see her father in a way she never had before, brave, clever, and calm in the face of impossible odds. She whispered to herself, "He can do it." The engines pulsed again and the alarms dimmed slightly. The Empress narrowed her eyes, leaning forward with interest. 28 engineers had failed, but this human, this simple father from a distant planet, had already started to understand the ship in ways they never could. The challenge was only beginning, but already John Carter had changed everything. John Carter took a deep breath and crouched near the main power conduit. The air hummed around him, warm and charged with electricity. He touched a small panel, feeling the vibration under his fingers. It was subtle, almost like the heartbeat of the ship. The alien engineers crowded around, whispering to one another, their eyes wide with skepticism. They could not understand why he was not panicking. "What are you doing?" one of them demanded. He was tall, with sharp features and a voice like metal scraping. "You cannot possibly understand this machine. It is beyond human comprehension." John looked up calmly. "I am not trying to understand it all at once. I am just listening." "Listening?" the engineer repeated, confused. "This is a core in crisis. Listening will not fix it." John smiled faintly. "Sometimes it does." He moved carefully along the pipes, tapping lightly, observing the faint variations in the hum. He noticed that some conduits vibrated more than others, and that the vibrations were not random. They followed a pattern, like waves in water. The core itself was not failing completely. It was reacting to the instability of the smaller systems around it. The human saw what the others had ignored: the tiny loops, the support circuits, the auxiliary pumps. The failure was not at the center but in the edges, and those edges controlled everything. Lily watched from a safe distance, holding her father's small tool bag. She could see the intensity in his eyes, the way he paused to feel, listen, and watch. She felt a mix of fear and admiration. If any mistake happened, it could be deadly. Yet he moved with quiet confidence, not rushing, not panicking. She whispered to herself, "He will do it. He always does." John knelt before a small panel and pressed a switch. Nothing obvious happened, but he noticed a subtle shift in the hum. It steadied for a fraction of a second, then wavered again. He nodded to himself. The ship was responding to even the smallest adjustments. He traced a minor energy loop and tightened a loose connector with a simple wrench from his bag. The vibration changed noticeably. The engineers muttered among themselves. "He touched the loop," one engineer whispered. "How can such a simple action affect the core?" "It is human intuition," another replied softly, almost grudgingly. "They see patterns differently, not with equations but with experience." The Empress, watching from above, crossed her arms. She had expected the human to fail immediately, to fumble, or to break something. Instead, she saw subtle changes in the core's behavior. She leaned closer, her sharp eyes following every move. Her pride urged her to dismiss it, yet curiosity held her in place. John moved from panel to panel, checking readings and feeling temperatures. He noticed that one of the auxiliary coolant pumps was leaking energy into the main conduit. The engineers had overlooked it because it was a minor deviation, insignificant in theory. John saw that the small imbalance created stress on the main core, causing repeated fluctuations. He tapped the panel lightly and adjusted the flow manually. Alarms sounded briefly and some engineers gasped. "You cannot do that," one shouted. "The core will explode if you reroute it manually," John kept calm. "It will not, just watch the response." The vibration steadied slightly and the hum became more even. The engineers stared in disbelief. They had relied on calculations, computers, and theory and still failed. A human working with hands and observation had made the first real progress. Lily stepped closer, still holding the tool bag. She spoke quietly to her father. "What is happening? Are we safe?" John glanced at her and smiled gently. "We are fine. I just need to guide the energy a little. The ship is like a living thing. It responds to touch and care." The Empress narrowed her eyes. Living thing. She had never heard such nonsense from a human, yet the results were undeniable. The core's hum was steadier than it had been for days. The warning lights blinked less frequently. The engineers shifted uncomfortably, some lowering their heads in shame. 28 of them had tried with all their knowledge and failed. This human, a simple mechanic and father, had already made measurable progress. Hours passed, and John worked systematically. He traced the energy lines, tested minor adjustments, and documented everything with a small tablet. His approach was simple: observe, act, wait, and observe again. He did not rush. He knew that rushing could trigger more instability. He also relied on intuition built from years of fixing complex but smaller machines. It was not about brilliance or advanced theory. It was about patience and persistence. "He is ignoring protocol," one engineer whispered nervously. "We are supposed to follow the manuals, the simulations, the procedures. He does none of that." "Yet look," another said, pointing to the core, "it is stabilizing. He is actually fixing it." The Empress leaned forward. She had expected the human to fail and be humiliated. Instead, he was quietly proving her advisors wrong. Pride and curiosity warred within her. She had ruled for decades and commanded thousands, yet she had never seen such a display of skill, simple as it was. She realized that humans solved problems differently. They did not follow elegant theories. They tested, observed, and corrected. Their flaws, their stubbornness, their hands-on approach could achieve what complex machines and clever minds sometimes could not. John crouched beside a small cooling vent and tapped it with a wrench. A small jet of steam hissed out, and the vibration changed again. He nodded. The adjustment was minor, almost imperceptible, but the cumulative effect of these small actions was already noticeable. The core pulsed more steadily, alarms dimmed further, and the engineers could not help but watch in awe. Lily approached closer. "Father, the Empress is watching you," she whispered. "She looks surprised." John smiled faintly. "Good, let her watch. I am not here for glory. I am here to fix the ship." The Empress spoke then, her voice calm but firm over the chamber speakers. "Human, your progress is unusual. Explain your method." John looked up. "I am just observing, testing, and adjusting. I look for small imbalances. The core is not broken at the center. It is reacting to stress in the edges. If we fix the small parts, the whole system becomes stable." "Edges?" an engineer asked. "We have been focusing on the core itself." John shrugged. "Sometimes the problem is not where everyone looks. The center is only reacting. Fix the edges and the heart can work again." There was a pause in the chamber. The alien engineers shifted uncomfortably. Their pride was wounded, but they could not argue with results. They had failed by focusing on complexity. John succeeded by focusing on what was simple, small, and practical. The Empress leaned back, intrigued. She had expected arrogance and failure, but instead she saw calm intelligence and practical skill. She realized she had underestimated humans. They were messy, unpolished, and unpredictable, yet in their stubbornness and care they could succeed where her empire failed. She made a note to observe this species further. They might be valuable allies or dangerous foes. As the day turned to night, John continued working. He adjusted flow rates, tightened connectors, and rerouted minor energy lines. Every small action brought the ship closer to stability. The engineers muttered, noting the changes but saying little. They had never seen this approach work, and it unsettled them. Lily sat quietly, holding her father's tools. She saw how focused he was, how methodical, how patient. She realized that fixing this ship was not about knowledge alone. It was about observation, care, and persistence. She felt proud of him in a way she never had before. By late evening, the humming of the core had changed. It was no longer wild and chaotic. It was steady, strong, and alive. The lights blinked less frequently, alarms softened, and even the air felt calmer. John stood, wiped sweat from his forehead, and took a step back. He had not finished, but he had begun to turn the impossible into the manageable. The Empress spoke again, her tone unreadable. "Human, continue. Do not fail. The Empire watches, and your actions will be remembered." John nodded. He understood the gravity, but he did not let fear control him. He moved back to the panels, ready to continue the work. He was just a human, a father from a distant world, but he had already changed the course of the Empire's flagship. And in that chamber, amid blinking lights and humming engines, a quiet truth became clear. Humans succeeded not because they were perfect, but because they refused to give up when others did. Patience, observation, and simple action could achieve what brilliance alone could not. John Carter would prove this again and again, and the Empress, whether she admitted it or not, had begun to see the quiet power of humanity. John Carter moved carefully through the engine chamber, his hands steady and his eyes sharp. The humming of the core was still strong, but it wavered in small pulses, like a heartbeat under strain. He knelt near a large panel and examined the wiring. The connections were not loose, but the flow was uneven. Small bursts of energy skipped like tiny lightning across circuits. This was the problem no one else had been able to solve. The alien engineers circled him nervously. They were uneasy with his methods, whispering to one another, casting glances at the Empress's observation deck. They had followed procedures, manuals, and protocols for decades, yet this human had made more progress than all of them combined. The idea that he could succeed where they had failed gnawed at their pride. "Human," one engineer said, his voice tight with irritation. "What are you doing now? Rerouting the main flow. The core will explode if you continue." John looked at him calmly. "I am not touching the core itself. I am adjusting the supporting lines. The core is strong enough to handle a little change." "You are reckless," another shouted. "Do you even understand the power levels in this system? One mistake, one could destroy the entire ship." John crouched, examining a small conduit. He tapped it gently. "The problem is not in the big systems, it is in the small ones. The minor imbalances are pushing the core to the edge. Fix these first, and the main system stabilizes naturally." The Empress leaned forward in her chair, her sharp eyes watching every move. She had expected arrogance and failure, yet this human worked quietly, observing, adjusting, and testing. There was no panic, no rush, just steady focus. She had never seen this kind of approach in the Empire's engineers, who always relied on theory and complex devices. Humans, she realized, approached problems differently. John moved to a panel of small, auxiliary pumps. 28 engineers had ignored them, thinking they were insignificant. John studied the flow patterns, noted the pressure variations, and twisted a valve slightly. The hum of the core changed immediately. It steadied, then faltered again. He adjusted another valve, then another, watching the responses carefully. Each small correction brought the system closer to balance. "Look at that," whispered one engineer. "He is fixing it without using the manuals or scanners. He is just feeling it." "Feeling it," another echoed, confused and annoyed. "How can that be enough?" John straightened slightly, wiping sweat from his brow. He examined a small energy loop that ran along the walls. A minor leak had formed, allowing energy to escape unpredictably. The engineers had considered it insignificant. John disagreed. He tightened the connections manually, careful not to disrupt the flow too much at once. Alarms flashed briefly and steam hissed, but the core responded positively. Lily stepped closer to watch. "Father, it is working," she whispered, her voice full of hope. I can see it, John smiled softly. Not yet, Lily. It is working better, but there is still more to do. The big adjustments come next. The Empress's voice rang through the chamber. Human, you are taking risks. The Empire watches. Do not fail. John looked up. I understand, Your Majesty. I will not. He moved to the main energy lines. Here, the adjustments were larger and the risk was higher. One wrong move could trigger overload, tripping the safety systems or worse. He checked his tools, then worked methodically, following the rhythm he had observed in the smaller systems. He rerouted minor flows, stabilized loops, and adjusted pressure regulators. The hum of the core shifted in response. It was steadier, more consistent, yet still fragile. One engineer could not contain himself. He stepped forward, pointing angrily. Stop! You cannot do that. The safety protocols, John held up a hand. I know the protocols. They will help if used correctly. Right now, the machine needs guidance, not rules. The engineer hesitated. He had never seen such calm confidence in a human before. John's eyes were steady, his hands precise, and he worked with a rhythm that seemed to make sense to the ship itself. The core responded to his touch, pulsing steadily rather than chaotically. The Empress watched intently. She felt her pride clash with fascination. She had underestimated humans. They were messy, stubborn, and unrefined, yet their approach was practical and effective. She made a note to observe them carefully. Such a species, if understood, could be more useful than she had imagined. John crouched near a small coolant valve. He noticed a minor pressure spike. The engineers had assumed it was normal, but John knew better. He adjusted the valve slowly, allowing the pressure to balance. The core's hum steadied and the lights stopped flickering. The engineers whispered among themselves. They could not deny the results. The human was changing the ship's behavior. He is doing it, one muttered. The core is stabilizing. But how? Another asked. He is not using theory or scanners. He is just working with what he sees and feels. John moved to a small panel near the core. He traced the energy lines with his fingers, noting where minor fluctuations occurred. He tapped lightly, adjusted a valve, and rechecked readings. The core pulsed more evenly, alarms dimmed, and the engineers grew silent. Even those who had mocked him began to watch with respect. Lily whispered, Father, they are noticing you. John nodded slightly. Let them notice. I am not here to impress anyone. I am here to fix what is broken. The Empress spoke again, her voice calm but sharp. Human, explain your method. Why are you making these changes? John looked up. The core is strong. It does not need direct interference. The smaller systems around it are causing instability. If we fix the edges, the heart can function naturally. It is simple, small corrections, careful observation, and patience. Patience, an engineer scoffed. We have been patient for weeks. You were looking at the wrong things, John said quietly. You focused on the center, the big systems. The problem was elsewhere, where it is subtle, easy to miss. Fix what matters, not what seems important. The Empress narrowed her eyes. You speak boldly, human, yet your results are undeniable. Continue, but be aware. One mistake in this ship and your life may be lost. John nodded. He moved back to the auxiliary pumps and small conduits, checking flows, pressures, and vibrations. Each small adjustment was precise, deliberate, and careful. He relied on his hands, his eyes, and his intuition. No human device, no scanner could have matched the understanding he was developing through experience. Hours passed. The humming core became steady, almost strong. Alarms were fewer, lights were stable, and the temperature began to balance. The engineers whispered to one another, some in admiration, some in frustration. They had relied on knowledge, theory, and technology, yet a human, a father from a distant world, had achieved what they could not. Lily approached her father, her voice full of wonder. Father, the ship, it feels calmer now. You did it, John smiled. Not yet, Lily. It is better, but we are not finished. The final adjustments will take care, but we are close. The Empress leaned forward, resting her chin on her hand. She realized that humans were not like her empire's species. They did not rely on perfection or complexity. They observed, adapted, and persisted. She felt her pride wrestle with respect. The human had changed the ship, and in doing so, had proven something about his species that she had never expected. John stood, wiping his hands. He looked around the chamber, noting the subtle shifts in energy, pressure, and flow. He made small notes on a tablet. Each adjustment built on the previous, each correction brought the ship closer to stability. He worked patiently, steadily, methodically. One of the engineers could no longer contain his amazement. He is not using advanced techniques, yet the results are real. We have failed, but he succeeds where we could not. John crouched again near a minor conduit, twisting a valve slightly. The core pulsed evenly. The hum was steady and the alarms were almost gone. He straightened, satisfied with the progress. The ship was not fully healed, but it was no longer in danger. The impossible was now manageable. Lily smiled, proud of her father. "You did it, father. They are watching you." John shook his head softly. "We are not done, Lily. Patience, observation, small steps. That is all it takes." The Empress's voice came again, calm but commanding. "Human, you are remarkable. Continue your work. The Empire watches." John nodded, moving back into the heart of the chamber. He was just a simple human, a mechanic, and a father, yet he had already begun to teach the Empire something new. Patience, observation, and persistence could achieve what brilliance and pride alone could not. He would continue, step by step, until the flagship was no longer failing. And in that chamber, amid the humming engines, flickering lights, and silent awe of the alien engineers, John Carter worked steadily. He was ordinary in many ways, yet extraordinary in this moment. A human, a father, and a mechanic had begun to turn the impossible into reality. The Empire had never seen the quiet strength of humanity, and it had only just begun. The hum of the flagship had changed. It was steadier now, but John Carter knew it was far from finished. He had stabilized the small systems, corrected minor leaks, and balanced auxiliary flows, yet the heart of the ship still pulsed with tension. The main conduit still fluctuated slightly, subtle but dangerous. A single misstep now could undo all the progress he had made. He crouched beside a large panel, tracing the energy lines with his hands. The vibrations were faint, like tiny whispers, but he felt them clearly. He could tell which circuits were under stress, which loops were misaligned, and which valves needed adjustment. The engineers watched silently, holding their breath. They were amazed that he could sense these things without advanced scanners or simulations. 28 of their best had failed, yet John's human intuition guided him steadily. "Father, are you sure it is safe?" Lily whispered from behind, clutching his tool bag. Her brown eyes were wide with worry. She had never seen him work under such pressure. John smiled faintly. "We have come this far. A few more careful steps and it will be stable. We just need patience." He moved slowly toward the central energy loop. This was the critical point where most of the strain converged. A slight error could trigger a cascade failure. The engineers murmured nervously, some muttering that he would destroy the ship. John ignored them. He had studied the flows, understood the pulses, and knew exactly what to do. His hands were steady and his mind clear. He adjusted a valve slightly, then stepped back to observe. The core pulsed more evenly, but a subtle spike appeared in one branch. He traced it carefully, following the path through smaller loops and auxiliary circuits. Each correction was minor, almost imperceptible, yet the cumulative effect began to stabilize the system further. "He is controlling the flow without complex equipment," one engineer whispered. "He is guiding it by hand." "It is impossible," another said, shaking his head. "We could not do this in decades, and yet he succeeds." John crouched again, this time near a minor energy regulator. It had been overlooked by everyone else. He adjusted it, watching the response carefully. The hum of the core softened, alarms dimmed further, and the lights stabilized. He nodded. Small steps, small corrections, each building toward balance. He had learned in life that no problem was too big if broken into parts. The Empress watched him closely from above. She had expected the human to fail, yet each adjustment he made improved the ship. Pride battled curiosity in her mind. She had never respected an outsider so quickly, yet this human with simple tools and patience had achieved what her empire had failed to do. She leaned forward, intrigued. John stood and wiped his hands. "Almost there," he said quietly to himself. He surveyed the chamber, noting the subtle changes in energy flows, pressure, and vibration. The ship was alive, responding to his guidance. The engineers shifted nervously, unsure whether to intervene. Many wanted to offer suggestions, but their pride kept them silent. They had learned long ago that theory alone could not always solve practical problems. John was proving that now. Suddenly, a minor surge hit one of the main conduits. The humming rose sharply and the lights flickered. The engineers froze. John crouched quickly, analyzing the spike. It was small but dangerous. If left unchecked, it could trigger a core shutdown. He twisted a valve, adjusted a regulator, and rerouted minor flows. The surge stabilized and the hum returned to a steady rhythm. "He did it again," one engineer whispered, disbelief in his voice. "One small action and the problem is gone." John moved to a panel near the auxiliary core. He had to adjust the energy loops simultaneously, a careful balancing act. Each loop affected another, and one wrong move could undo all progress. He worked with focus, adjusting one loop, checking the response, then moving to the next. It was painstaking, delicate work. The engineers watched in silence, marveling at his precision. Lily approached cautiously. "Father, you are amazing," she whispered. "I have never seen anyone like you." John smiled faintly. "Thank you, Lily. Patience, observation, and care, that is what matters." As he worked, the Empress spoke over the chamber speakers. Her voice was calm but sharp. "Human, you have surpassed expectation. Explain your final adjustments. How will you stabilize the core completely?" John looked up, his brown eyes steady. "The core is strong, Your Majesty. It responds to guidance." The small systems were causing imbalance. By correcting them and managing the energy flow carefully, the heart can function naturally. The final adjustments will align the remaining loops and regulators. Nothing drastic, just balance and patience. The Empress studied him silently. She had expected arrogance and failure, yet he spoke humbly. He did not boast. He did not demand recognition. He simply focused on the task. She realized that humans were different. They did not rely on superiority, but on persistence and practicality. She began to respect him, though she would never admit it fully. John returned to the main conduits. The final adjustments required simultaneous actions. He moved carefully, adjusting minor regulators, guiding flows, and balancing pressures. The engineers could hardly keep up, but they watched closely. Some started to assist cautiously, following his precise instructions. Others stepped back, unwilling to admit that the human led them. The hum of the core grew steady, even, and strong. Alarms dimmed almost completely. Lights were bright and constant. The energy flows were balanced. John stepped back and surveyed the chamber. The flagship, which had been on the brink of failure, now pulsed steadily like a living being restored to health. Lily ran to him, her eyes wide with excitement. "Father, you did it. It is working." John knelt, smiling at her. "Not alone, Lily. The ship helped. Observation, patience, and small steps. That is how we fixed it." The engineers slowly approached, heads bowed. Some muttered apologies, others words of respect. They had been humbled. 28 of them had failed, yet a human had succeeded. The Empress's words came next. "Human, your work is complete," she said. "The ship is stabilized and the Empire owes you recognition. Explain yourself to the Council. Let them see the skill of humanity." John nodded, brushing his hands. He did not expect praise, yet he felt satisfaction. He had saved the flagship, protected its crew, and demonstrated something important: humanity's quiet strength. As he walked toward the Empress's observation deck, the engineers whispered among themselves. Some admitted quietly that humans were clever, practical, and stubborn in ways that could achieve results others could not. The Empress watched him closely, her pride softened by admiration. She had underestimated humans, yet this one human had changed everything. John faced the Empress. She regarded him with a mix of curiosity, respect, and lingering pride. "You have done what we could not," she said. 28 engineers failed, yet you, a simple human, succeeded. Why?" John smiled softly. "I do not know if I am special, Your Majesty. I just observe, correct what is wrong, and do not give up. Small steps, patience, and care. That is how problems get fixed." The Empress considered this. She had relied on power, knowledge, and prestige, yet here was a human who had achieved success through humility and persistence. She realized that humans were dangerous in a different way. They were unpredictable, persistent, and practical. She had underestimated them. "Your method is unusual but effective," she said finally. "The Empire will remember this. Your people may have value beyond what I imagined." John nodded, understanding her meaning. He had done his work, stabilized the flagship, and shown that humanity could solve problems differently. He had not sought reward, only to fix what was broken. Yet his actions had changed the perceptions of an entire empire. Lily hugged him tightly. "Father, I am so proud of you." John smiled down at her. "Thank you, Lily. We did it together. Patience, care, and persistence. That is all it took." The engineers now approached him, some quietly offering thanks, others with reluctant admiration. John accepted with simple nods. He had no desire for glory. His goal had been the ship, not recognition. Yet the results were undeniable. The Empress leaned back in her chair, watching the human calmly. She had expected arrogance and failure, yet this human had succeeded through quiet skill and persistence. She realized that humanity's strength was subtle but powerful. They could not be ignored, underestimated, or dismissed. John packed up his tools, checked the readings one last time, and stepped back. The flagship hummed steadily, alive and stable. He had done what 28 engineers could not. He had turned chaos into balance, instability into order, all through observation, patience, and small, careful adjustments. Lily ran beside him. "They are all looking at you, Father. The Empress is impressed." John shook his head. "It is not about impressing anyone. It is about fixing what is broken. That is all humans need to do." And in that chamber, amid the blinking lights, the steady hum of the core, and the silent awe of the alien engineers, John Carter stood. A human, a father, and a mechanic had achieved the impossible. He had proven that small steps, patience, and persistence could succeed where pride, knowledge, and complexity had failed. The flagship was stable, and humanity had quietly shown its power to an entire empire. The flagship now hummed steadily, strong and alive. John Carter stepped back from the panels, wiping sweat from his brow. He looked around the engine chamber, noting the calm air, the steady lights, and the even flow of energy. The ship was no longer on the brink of disaster. It was stable, functional, and ready to travel across the stars. Lily ran to him, her eyes shining. "Father, it worked." "You really did it," John smiled, kneeling to hug her. "We did it, Lily. The ship helped and we worked together. Patience and small steps fixed it." The engineers stood quietly, some muttering their respect, others reluctantly bowing. They had spent weeks failing, following protocols and simulations, yet a human had succeeded with simple observation and care. The lesson was clear. They could not ignore human skill, even if it was so different from their own methods. The Empress entered the engine chamber herself. Her robes shimmered as she walked, her glowing eyes fixed on John. She had watched every step, every adjustment, every small correction he had made. Pride, curiosity, and a strange admiration mixed on her face. She had underestimated humans, yet this one had achieved what her empire could not. "Human," she said, her voice calm but commanding. "You have done what 28 engineers could not. The flagship is stable, and the empire owes you acknowledgement. Explain yourself to the council. Let them see the skill of humanity." John stood, brushing his hands. He did not seek glory or praise. "Your Majesty, I did not do it for recognition. I did it to fix what was broken. Observation, patience, and care were enough. Small corrections made step by step stabilized the ship, nothing more." The Empress studied him, impressed by his humility. She realized that humans were not boastful. They were practical, persistent, and focused on results. She had underestimated the quiet power of their approach. The Council of Engineers and Advisors was called to witness John's explanation. They filed into the observation chamber, whispers passing among them. Many had expected failure, ridicule, or chaos. Instead, they saw a human calmly explaining the final adjustments, describing the small corrections, and showing how the ship's flow had been stabilized. The engineers listened quietly. They could not argue with the results. The ship had been restored, and it would have survived only through John's careful guidance. Some took notes, others whispered to one another. 28 of their best had failed. One human had succeeded. The lesson was humbling. "I did not do anything special," John said to the council. "I just observed the system, found the small problems causing the larger ones, and corrected them carefully. Patience and persistence are important. Sometimes small steps are more effective than complicated plans or theory." One engineer, a tall figure with green skin, nodded slowly. "Your method is simple, yet effective. We rely on complex calculations, but your human approach worked where we could not." Another muttered, "It is humbling to admit, we cannot deny the results." The Empress spoke again. "Human, your actions have shown something important about your species. They are practical, persistent, and clever in ways we have not understood. This empire should recognize their potential value." John nodded simply. He had no desire for reward or praise. He only wanted to return home safely with his daughter. Yet his actions had already shifted the perception of humanity across an entire empire. As he left the engine chamber with Lily, the engineers quietly bowed. Even those who had doubted him now respected his skill. John accepted their acknowledgement with quiet nods. He did not boast. He simply knew that the ship was safe, and that was enough. Lily looked up at her father. "People are amazed by you, father. The Empress even respects you." John smiled faintly. "I did not do it for them. I did it because it was the right thing to do. Patience, care, and persistence fix problems. That is all humans need to know." The Empress approached them. "Human, you have shown the value of your species. We underestimated humans, yet you have proven they possess quiet strength. You and your daughter are welcome guests, and your people may find a place in this empire if they are as capable as you." John bowed slightly. "Thank you, Your Majesty. I only fixed what was broken. Humans can do many things if given a chance. Patience, observation, and small steps often succeed where complexity fails." Lily held his hand tightly. "Father, the Empire will remember you." John nodded. "Perhaps, but it is not about recognition. It is about doing what must be done." As they walked to the airlock, the Empress's advisors whispered among themselves. Humans were different, unpredictable, yet effective. The Empire had long relied on complex machines and advanced calculations, but this human had shown that practical skill and careful observation could achieve what theory alone could not. They would remember this lesson. John and Lily entered their small shuttle. The engines hummed steadily. The flagship behind them was no longer on the brink of disaster. It was stable, strong, and alive, ready to travel across the stars again. As the shuttle departed, the Empress watched from her observation deck. She had expected failure, yet one human had changed everything. The Empire had underestimated humans, and now she understood their quiet strength. They were not soldiers, not advanced engineers, yet their persistence, care, and ability to solve problems could shape events in ways the Empire had never imagined. Lily leaned against her father as the shuttle glided through space. "Father, you really did it. You saved the flagship." John smiled and looked out the viewport. "We did it together, Lily. Remember, no problem is too big if broken into small steps. Patience and care are more powerful than anyone expects." The humans left the Empire's flagship behind, but rumors spread quickly. A human father had fixed the impossible ship, where 28 of the Empire's best engineers had failed. The story traveled across worlds and systems, growing with every retelling. Humans were no longer seen as weak, ordinary, or insignificant. Their quiet skill, persistence, and practical thinking were being noticed. The Empress spoke to her council later. "We have underestimated humans. They are dangerous in a different way. They are persistent, practical, and clever in ways we cannot predict. We will watch them closely." John and Lily traveled back to their homeworld. They did not boast, they did not celebrate. The work had been done, the ship stabilized, and humanity's quiet power had been proven. John reflected on the events, understanding that persistence, observation, and small steps could achieve what others could not. It was not brilliance, it was not theory, it was simple care and patience. Lily looked up at him. "Father, do you think they will remember humans?" John smiled. "I think they will, not because we are the strongest or the smartest, but because we do not give up. We fix what others leave broken. That is our strength." The Empire had learned a lesson it could not ignore. Humans were practical, persistent, and capable of achieving the impossible in ways no one had predicted. The flagship was stable, the Empress had witnessed it, and the engineers had learned humility. All because one human father refused to give up. As John and Lily landed on their homeworld, they stepped out into the warm sunlight. The journey had been long and dangerous, but they had proven something important. Ordinary humans, through care, patience, and persistence, could achieve extraordinary things. And in distant systems, whispers of the human father who fixed the impossible ship spread. The Empire, the engineers, and the Empress herself would remember this story, not because he sought glory, but because he quietly demonstrated the power of humanity. Patience, observation, and small steps could succeed where pride, theory, and complexity failed. John Carter had shown them all what it meant to be human. The galaxy had taken notice, and humanity's quiet strength had earned its place among the stars.